Denver Broncos cornerback Patrick Surtain II, he's ready to earn a massive contract extension this season. What does he have to do in order to secure the bag? We'll break that down and much more here on today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Broncos Country? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much to everybody in Broncos Country, all the everyday listeners out there. Thanks so much for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day. Every single day, you can get this podcast for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And make sure, hey, if you're listening to us on Mondays and Tuesdays and that's it, why don't you bump that up to Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday? Every single day, all year long, we have you covered with fresh, brand new Broncos content. So make sure you're turning that 2 listens per week into 5 listens per week wherever you get your podcast. I'm Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports, joined alongside, as always, by my good friend, my co-host, Sayre Bedinger. He's the site expert at predominantlyorange.com. You can check out both of our written work. You can check his out at predominantlyorange.com. Check out mine at milehighsports.com. And obviously, you get Locked On Broncos every single day here. But look, Broncos Country, OTAs. Yes, baby, OTAs is the conversation this week. We've analyzed the Broncos quarterback competition beginning. We've taken a look at the wide receiver position and asked the question whether or not we're going to see Courtland Sutton. But now we're going to really focus on cornerback, which, to be honest with you, seems like the one position we do have a lot of questions about. We're going to kick things off with a guy we don't have questions about, though, and that is PS2. In prime right now, in a contract year, in prime positioning to earn a mega contract extension, which we anticipate is going to happen for the Broncos star cornerback. And I tell you what, Sarah, if there's anything that we have to look forward to, is the extension. It's when Adam Schefter, Ian Rappaport drop it saying, hey, breaking news, Broncos and cornerback Patrick Surtain agreed to a record-setting contract, which we anticipate when that does happen, it is going to be the highest paid cornerback position in history. I think that's exactly what we're going to be looking at here.
Well, and now that he's competing against the contract that Antoine Winfield Jr. signed as well, which was touted as the highest ever for a defensive back. So now we've gone from just corners to, hey, I saw he reset the defensive back market over there in Tampa Bay. Let's start talking about that. So that kind of leads us to this idea, and I think you agree with me, Cody. Maybe the Broncos need to get this deal done sooner rather than later. It may only be the difference between paying Surtain, maybe a deal that's worth $22 million per season as opposed to a deal that next offseason could be worth upwards of $25+ million per season, but you certainly want to get this deal done as quickly as you can, and you can use the Antoine Winfield Jr. contract as sort of a baseline. I really like that idea of getting this done. Now the Broncos have picked up his 5th-year option for next year, so he's under contract in 2025. An extension doesn't even have to kick in until 2026 in terms of salary cap implications. The Broncos will be able to give him all that cash with that ownership group. They'll be able to give him that cash up front and be able to push that can down the road so they can continue to be in a favorable cap situation after this year.
Well, and now that we look at where Denver's at and the direction that they're heading with PS2, going to be the headline player for that defensive backfield in Denver. Look, obviously, for many, many years, Justin Simmons has been the guy for the Broncos. When you think of their secondary, you think of the leader in that room, it has been Justin Simmons. But now, with Simmons' departure this offseason, the Broncos have to make that tough decision. Now is the perfect opportunity for PS2 to step in and have a bigger leadership role. And look, Pat's the type of guy, I can tell you this being around Pat. Love Pat. Funny guy, great personality. Pat is also a guy that I think is just he's not necessarily like the very loud, vocal, rah-rah type of guy, but he is the, hey, do it, like, watch me. Like, he's a lead by example type of guy. And I think they have everyone in that secondary room. And I think there's going to be some other young voices that can emerge a little bit, not necessarily at cornerback, but I think you see some guys at safety emerge like PJ Locke, Caden Stearns. They've been around Justin. They understand the leadership traits that he had, and they're looking to carry that forward here. But for Pat is the guy that literally doesn't talk. Like, he goes out there, he locks guys up, doesn't say a word, but he still has this competitive, fiery chip on his shoulder, which I still love there. And obviously, you get to see a little bit of a season opener, him versus DK Metcalf once again. The last time those two battled, PS2 did a really good job against him. That was a fun game to watch there. Can he get the best of him here once again as the Broncos going to open up the season against the Seahawks in week 1 of the NFL season on September 8th? There's a lot of excitement here, but obviously an increase in leadership responsibility is probably going to be tasked, especially if he's going to be getting a mega contract. The Broncos are essentially making him the face of the franchise at the defensive position, really at the defensive side of the ball, but also for the team. Like, he and Bo Nix, as we anticipate, will probably be the faces of this team for the next few years.
And you just really hope at this point that the Broncos can surround him to the point that he's able to make a really substantial impact in big games. I mean, we saw over the course of last season that the dreadful start to the year for the entire defense, but then as the season went along, having Pat Surtain and his ability to lock up one side of the field during that winning streak the Broncos were on, I mean, that's exactly what this team hopes for. That's what you always hope for if you're an NFL franchise. When you draft a corner in the first round, like, you want to have him making those types of big impacts on big games and taking out a top receiver as frequently as possible. And so now it's going to be a matter of, can you get the rest of the roster to the point to where having that franchise cornerback is really more meaningful? We saw that in Denver years ago with Champ Bailey when he came in, right? And you were able to surround him with the proper rest of the team, get the pass rush out there, get the run defense to force teams to throw and throw at him. That was when he really started to take off and became that team legend. Of course, he was always good, but then when the team started to play well around him, that's when he started getting defensive MVP consideration and things like that. And maybe the same could be true for PS2. Get the rest of the roster to the point to where you can really benefit from having a guy like him. That's one of the debates I see all the time, Cody, on Twitter and X and things like that, is like, people kind of, especially when the trade talks were happening with you in terms and the rumor mill swirling there, people are saying, well, does it really matter if you have a good corner like this on your roster if everybody else is bad? Well, yeah, it does matter. It definitely matters. You want to have the best possible players everywhere, but talk maybe a little bit about that and why that's kind of a silly notion to think that PS2 is being wasted on this Broncos team right now.
Well, I mean, I think it's quite clear as day. Like, look at what happened down the stretch for the Broncos. I mean, I remember the conversations on Twitter, and I think this should put it to, all the conversation, all the talk to rest, that the Broncos don't need Patrick Surtain. When you're watching Fabian Moreau get smoked, I'm like, okay, well, Fabian Moreau's getting smoked. Imagine if Patrick Surtain's not on this team. Remember, PS2 almost started that game with a pick 6 against the Raiders to open up that season finale game last season. But he's a guy that can take away one side of the field, and people are like, well, he doesn't really have a big impact. What are we measuring impact? Like, if you're taking away a top productive receiver from another team, that, in my opinion, is a big impact. Well, he doesn't get a lot of interceptions. Once again, we focus so much on, well, what do his stats say? Like, you look at, obviously, I think maybe targets, catches allowed. Those are more important metrics than how many interceptions he has. And you look at just, you need a guy opposite of him, really, because teams are not going to look to throw to PS2's way. I think more importantly this year, I don't think PS2 was used right last year. I think that the scheme that had him playing more off-ball coverage, Sayre, off-ball man, off-zone coverage, I didn't like that. Look, understand there's going to be times you have to do that. But let PS2 go up to the line of scrimmage and play press man-to-man coverage. You talk about one of the most fundamentally, technically sound corners in the game, and you're going to play him 7 yards off the ball. When it's 3rd and 3, you're going to have him play 7 yards outside leverage off and just say, okay, hey, run up and go make a play there. That's impossible to put a task on that on any cornerback and have sustained success. The Broncos, in my opinion, need to put PS2 in a better position, get back to what he excelled at in his first couple seasons, press, man-to-man coverage. To me, that's going to be important here for the Broncos. And look, PS2, his spot is secure on this roster. There's no questions about who the cornerback 1 is, but who will win the Broncos cornerback 2 competition that's beginning this week at OTAs? We're going to put a couple players under the microscope here on today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos. Broncos Country, today's episode, Locked On Broncos, is brought to you by our friends over there at Yahoo Finance. And when it comes to your financial future, you think you've done it all. You've saved, you've researched, you've invested all that you can. Now you need to take those investments to the next level by using what every financial great uses, and that is Yahoo Finance. If you want to learn more about the financial market, things that are going on, Yahoo Finance has been a great tool for me, especially analyzing trends, flows, things like that. For more than 25 years, Yahoo Finance has been the brand behind every great investor. And whether you're a seasoned investor or you're looking for that extra guidance, Yahoo Finance gives you all the tools and the data that you need in one place. They're the number one finance destination, producing a holistic look at the financial news cycle, including breaking news, original editorial perspectives, analyst ratings, independent research, customizable charts, and so much more. Securely link your brokerage accounts for a unified view of your wealth, including 401k and other investments. A comprehensive perspective is what sets apart great investors, and it's how Yahoo Finance ensures that you have the insights to look at your wealth in its entirety. With a community of over 90 million users each month, their real strength is helping you on your way to financial success. For a comprehensive financial news and analysis, visit the brand behind every great investor, yahoofinance.com, the number one financial destination, yahoofinance.com. That's yahoofinance.com.
We know PS2 is going to be locking it down on his side of the field, but who is CB2 for the Denver Broncos in 2024? There's a number of candidates, and whoever wins this job is going to be getting the ball thrown their direction a lot in 2024. We're going to talk about who that might be on today's episode, Locked On Broncos, and want to say thank you and give a shout out to all of you who make Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, free and available everywhere that you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube, where Cody and I appreciate every single one of you who watch the show as well as listen. And if you subscribe, whether it's a podcast or on YouTube, man, we appreciate you for doing that today if you haven't already, especially. But let's talk about CB2, cornerback 2 for the Denver Broncos. This was a problem area last year, and you know it was a problem area because of how good Fabian Moreau looked compared to anybody else who played over there. But look, it was a disastrous start to the season for the entire defense. You hate to just pin that on Damarri Mathis, and we'll talk more about him, but it was really the floor was raised when Fabian Moreau came in, and I don't know if that was just a result of everything else in the defense kind of starting to come together as well. Probably so, but everything started to come together after that. You know, the personnel changes were made. Fabian played the outside corner. Jaquan McMillan came into the slot. More on him to come as well. Let's talk about the cornerback 2 competition this year, because Fabian Moreau is gone. The young players remain, and now you've got a new veteran in the mix.
There are a lot of questions here as to how it's going to go. I think if we are basing it off of how did the Broncos secondary look last year, who are the returning players, what were their roles, I think ideally we're thinking of cornerback 2, and this is how we classify it. Cornerback 2 is the other cornerback spot on the outside. Some people say, well, who's the next best cornerback? You can make arguments there. But in terms of like the depth and the personnel look, I think that there's a wide variety of players that could be factored into this. Like, I don't think it's just going to be, I don't think it's just going to be Riley Moss, Damarri Mathis, and Levi Wallace as the 3 guys to be considered for the starting outside job. I think there's a realistic scenario that we can factor those 3 guys into the occasion. But then we also add Chris Abrams-Drain, the Broncos draft selection out of Mizzou, and we also add Jaquan McMillan into that mix there, because I think the wild card factor here that we have to discuss, Jim Leonhard taking over the team's passing game coordinator and obviously the defensive backs coach. I think the double title there is probably the more interesting thing versus him just being the defensive backs coach. He is a guy that could be considered an NFL defensive coordinator in the next 1 to 2 years. There was some interest from some other teams around the league in him, but it's different. Obviously, with Christian Parker departing, going and reunite with Vic Fangio in Philadelphia, part of me wonders, is the passing game scheme going to change a little bit now with Jim Leonhard having that title of passing game coordinator? Because as we know with the safety position, these guys at safety are not expected to play just one role. They're expected to know both safety positions. So ideally, that same philosophy has to trickle down to the cornerback room where, hey, if you play on the outside, you need to learn how to play inside the slot. If you play inside the slot, you also need to learn how to play on the outside. Jaquan McMillan is a guy who's got experience in both the slot and he's got experience on the outside. Chris Abrams-Drain, he's got experience in the slot, has experience on the outside, even though he's a little undersized there. He's played big. And then obviously Levi Wallace, a guy who's played on the outside there. You look at PS2, he's a guy you can honestly move around anywhere. You can play him on the outside, or if the team's best receiver moves to the slot, you can play him inside the slot. We haven't seen him do that too much, but you should do that. To me, I think it extends just beyond Riley Moss, Damarri Mathis, Levi Wallace. I think you add 2 other guys into that mix and maybe even throw in undrafted rookie free agent Art Green into consideration as well. I think Denver's cornerback 2 competition is going to have a lot of bodies in it. I think that's going to make an exciting storyline here this entire offseason. That's just what we see right now on paper, perception-wise. It could change. Sayre could very well be those three guys that you had mentioned. I think there's going to be more than that, though.
Yeah, there's also, I mean, free agency is also an extension right now of your depth chart. You have to consider that. I know that, I mean, this is the biggest name guy that's out there. I know we don't have this in the script, Cody, but you just made me think of it when we're talking about how, I mean, there's all these options out there. I mean, Xavier Howard, he was drafted in 2016 by the Miami Dolphins when Vance Joseph was their defensive coordinator, and he started games for him there as a rookie. So there's a connection there potentially if the Broncos don't feel good about whatever they've got going on, if they don't feel good about the development of the young guys, if Levi Wallace doesn't pan out the way that they think. So the free agency right now has to be considered an extension a little bit of your depth chart, at least as long as some of these guys are there. But you really hope, if you're the Denver Broncos, you've invested, and we talked about this in the lead up to the NFL draft, right? You've invested so much at this position in the way of, I want to say top 100 picks. I know Damarri Mathis was outside of the top 100, but you date it back to 2018 when you draft Isaac Yiadom, and then 2019 and 2020, you draft Michael Ojemudia, 2021, Pat Surtain, 22, Damarri Mathis, 23, Riley Moss, and then 24. Now you get Chris Abrams-Drain in there, who was projected to be a third or fourth round pick by a lot of people. So there's a lot going on at this position. You've thrown a lot of darts. I think if you're the Broncos, you're really holding out hope that Riley Moss is going to be that guy. You traded up to get him last year, and they've been kind of staunch in saying, like, this guy's a corner. I mean, a lot of people wanted to peg Riley Moss as a safety coming out of Iowa for, a number of reasons, but he's got the size, he's got the athleticism, the ball skills, the ability to play outside corner, or like you said, maybe if you learn multiple positions, maybe he could float as well. So I think the team, if I'm reading things correctly, Cody, I would say from my perspective that the team's got to be hoping beyond all hope that Riley Moss develops into this guy opposite Patrick Surtain.
Well, and I think with Riley as well, you look at, where he was at. The injury derailed him last year. You look at Damarri Mathis. He had an injury in training camp, and obviously he ended up getting benched. And I think so many people have also written off Damarri Mathis like, oh, Damarri's like, the one thing that frustrates me is a guy has a bad year or has a bad stretch of games. Oh, he's terrible. Cut him. He's the worst player the Broncos have ever. Like, I hate that commentary because it's such a week-to-week thing. Damarri is a very, very talented player. He's not afraid to come up and tackle. He's not afraid to get his hands dirty, but he's also a guy that is also, I think athletic and elusive in the backfield. He can make plays. Did he have a bad 2023? Yes, he did. Does he have a lot to prove here in 2024? Absolutely. Yes, he does. But I feel like we see it far too often, guys being written off. I think this is what's the most exciting part about training camp. And obviously, the buildup in the offseason program is these guys are going to get a lot of run, and they're going to get the opportunities to go out there and make plays. And I think this is where we also maybe have to factor in Levi Wallace into the conversation. Now, obviously, he started his career as a member of the Buffalo Bills, was a full-time starter there in all the games that he appeared in Buffalo. When he went to Pittsburgh for the past 2 seasons, look, he's appeared in various games, but he's only started half the season in those 2 games there. And obviously, he's coming off of a very, very rough season. When you look at it in pass coverage, he gave up 40 catches on 75 targets, a completion percentage of 53.3%, passes completed when thrown his way for an average of 14.2 yards per completion given up. He gave up 6 touchdowns last season, and quarterbacks had a 93.7 passer rating when targeting Levi Wallace, according to Pro Football Reference. On top of that, missed tackles, 6 tackles missed last season. That accounts for 13.6%, which is usually not the ideal thing. You want to aim for the 10% or under. I mean, ideally, you want to go under 10% missed tackle rate there. But for Wallace, it's also a lot of people are writing him off because of his bad season that he had there. Every year is so different, and you learn things from every year. I can tell you in years, and anyone who's played football, there's probably been years where, if you've played, you relate to this as well. You didn't have your best season, right? Did you let that deter you from going out and developing and getting better? And did you continue to play bad? Or did you work hard and obviously say, you know what, I had a bad year. I'm not going to go through that again. I'm going to do whatever I can to go out there and put myself in a better position to hone in on my skills and my technique. Levi's also got a great mindset as well heading into this offseason. So I think it's going to be a very rich competition on the outside for the Broncos. I think it's going to be more than just Riley Moss, who's obviously there's a lot of excitement in the eyes of Broncos country around him. And not to be disrespectful, I don't want to act like we're forgetting Tremont Smith, but I think when we look at the Broncos moves, Sayre, we know Tremont is going to be a special teams ace and is not really going to factor into the cornerback rotation because he hasn't really done that so far in his NFL career. Not to write him off entirely, but I'm just looking at it for how it is. The writing's on the wall there. He's going to be a special teams contributor, but now he may even have competition on special teams to maybe keep his job here in 2024. So just to touch on that dynamic, everyone wants to know now, though, is the Broncos nickel job up for grabs there? Jaquan McMillan coming back as the team starter. We'll tell you why he may have some competition, and it may not just be a couple of names. It may be a wide variety of guys that we'll look at here on today's brand new episode of Locked On Broncos. Broncos Country. Today's episode, Locked On Broncos, is brought to you by our friends over there at the GameTime app. And GameTime is a place where you can get killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. GameTime takes the guesswork out of buying NFL tickets. We know the schedule. We know the games, whether you're in Denver or whether you're a Broncos fan, but the team is coming somewhere near you. GameTime is a place where you can go to get your Broncos tickets this upcoming season. For example, if you want to go to the Broncos home opener against Russell Wilson and the Pittsburgh Steelers in week 2, GameTime is the place to go. They have flash deals, zone deals, all in price, and where when you toggle that feature, it shows you your total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. Plus, you get to see the view of what the game is going to look like from your vantage point, from your seat, from your area. What will the field look like when you're attending that game? You can see that directly inside of the GameTime app. They have their lowest price guarantee, or GameTime, they'll cover you and credit you 110% of the difference. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the GameTime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. As we jump into the fourth quarter action on today's episode of Locked On Broncos, we just want to say thank you so much to everybody in Broncos Country, all the everydayers out there. Thank you so much for rocking with us, tuning into the show. If you're a brand new viewer or listener of Locked On Broncos, do us a favor, subscribe or follow so you never miss out on what's going on. I cover practice every day in season here for Mile High Sports. Sayre breaks everything down over there as the site expert at predominantlyorange.com. When you want objective point of views, look, Sayre and I don't always agree on everything, but we like to bring constructive conversation to what Broncos Country has going on, because there's a lot of smoke out there in terms of what you get, the coverage that you get on this team. We like to bring it from every side, every angle possible here, and we couldn't do it without all of you here in Broncos Country. So thank you very much here. Sayre, as we continue on our conversation here, looking at the Broncos cornerback position as OTAs continue, obviously competition going on, various positions, but we have our questions here at corner. Is the Broncos nickel job up for grabs here this season after what we saw from Jaquan McMillan last year, really emerging and kind of taking the mantle and running with it and doing an excellent job? One of the top defensive backs inside the slot last season, according to Pro Football Focus and some other metrics there. NFL Next Gen Stats had him as one of the best, most efficient slot defenders last season. Is he the guy automatically, or do you think he's going to have some competition here this offseason?
Well, he's going to have to be the odds-on favorite, right? I mean, after what we saw last year, 51 total tackles, 7 tackles for loss, 3 quarterback hits, 2 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, 2 fumbles recovered, a couple of interceptions, and 5 passes defense. I mean, we talked about this when the Broncos initially signed Jaquan McMillan as an undrafted free agent. What gave him an edge as an undrafted guy is the fact that, well, he was an All-American at East Carolina, first of all, which is tough to do in general, but you get your hands on the ball enough times and you prove that it's not just being in the right place at the right time. It's, I know where the ball's going and I've got the instinct to be there, and he does. And you see that when he plays. Man, he just has such a great feel for the game. And I know that we talk a lot on this show about how, hey, development in the NFL, it's not always going to be just this consistent line going straight up, right? It's oftentimes you're going to have peaks and valleys. And I think we did see that for him a little bit last year as well. So maybe there's a chance somebody could unseat him, but I think he's going to make it really, really tough for those guys, isn't he? Because, well, he's the incumbent and he knows how to make plays on the ball and he can get after the quarterback. He can make those big hits behind the line of scrimmage. There's just so much to like about his game that you would think if somebody comes in and takes his job this year, man, they must have had an otherworldly offseason program.
I'm glad you brought up his production at East Carolina, always being where the football is. And look, that's even something that Sean Payton has really kind of emphasized and has said, like, hey, this guy has consistently, he's got a nose for the football. What bothers me so much, Sarah, is like when the Broncos went on that winning streak last season, you saw all these things on social media. We've seen it in our comments. Well, the Broncos, they just got lucky. The defense just got on this all-time historic lucky run. There was no luck here in that situation. Like the Broncos, they literally work turnover circuit every single day at practice. I watch it and they go through like, hey, we're going to wrap up the ball carrier. We're going to strip it. They go through a different variety of things. And that stuff that they were doing in practice was translating over in games. I don't like when we minimize that to, well, it was just luck. Like Jaquan McMillan, known ball takeaway guy, ball producer, knows ball. Like that is what Jaquan did. And they did it on the field and it translated. You want to see that happen. And you're hoping you're going to see that happen with other guys like Chris Abrams-Drain, who I think is a name we can probably factor in. Okay, if there's going to be competition, we're going to keep our eyes on the Broncos rookie who they drafted out of Missouri. Now, obviously, I think what we talked about in the last segment about the cornerback 2 competition on the outside, I think a good portion of that's going to apply to this when we talk about guys who may play on the outside, like the Riley Mosses, the Damarri Mathis. Could they maybe even compete for the nickel job as well? Could a safety potentially compete for the nickel job for Denver? Like all these options right now are on the table, especially as Denver builds out their depth chart, which look, there's a long ways before that's going to be solidified overall, but there's some other players here that we can mention, right? Obviously, I think Jaquan McMillan right now, the projected starter, we anticipate he is going to be the guy. But here's some other names to keep an eye on. Quentin Newsome, the undrafted rookie free agent cornerback out of Nebraska, is a name to keep an eye on. I think Riley Moss, because he played a little bit in the diamond, played in the slot last season down the end stretch here for the Broncos. Damarri Mathis is a name to keep an eye on. And I think there's also, Reese Taylor, who was on the roster last season in terms of being on the Broncos practice squad. They have a variety of different names. And in particular, you're going to see a ton of wide receivers. You're going to see a ton of defensive backs overall here as the Broncos go through their offseason program with the roster being set at 90 players. There's going to be a lot of guys. And so for me, I'm very curious this week. We've talked about how Sean Payton rotates guys on offense. How is Vance Joseph? How is Jim Leonhard? How are these guys going to rotate these guys defensively to get the best overall evaluation on, hey, this guy is fitting what we want right away? Is he maintaining his starting spot from last year, or is there a new guy emerging? Like, this is where we have to look. And you also have to factor in, this just extends beyond the nickel. I mean, Sarah, the dime package is also another area we have to factor in. And for those who don't know what the dime package is, dime is where you have 6 DBs on the field. Nickel is when you have 5 guys on the field. And in Denver's dime, you're going to have 2 cornerbacks on the outside. You're going to have 2 slot defenders, and you're going to have 2 safeties on the back end. So who is going to be the best bet in your opinion? If you had to project it early on right now, the Broncos dime package, what do you think that looks like, and who do you think are going to be the 2 guys in the slot?
Well, I love the idea of having Jaquan McMillan in the slot on one side and then Caden Stearns on the other, because those are the 2 guys that we've really seen. I like the little thumbs up too, by the way, Cody, which you don't get if you're not listening to this. I saw a little thumbs up just pop up in your viewfinder there. That was kind of cool right there. But look, I think Caden Stearns and Jaquan McMillan, those are 2 guys to where we've seen the ball production from those position groups, and we've seen the ability to rush the passer. We've seen the aggressiveness in reading the quarterback and reacting. I think when you talk about having those 2 guys in the slot, and then on the back end, you've got PJ Locke and Brandon Jones, and then at the outside corner positions, Pat Surtain and hopefully Riley Moss, or a bounce back year from Damarri Mathis. That's what we're hoping for, I think, in terms of the guys the Broncos have drafted and invested in like that could be long-term options. That would be ideal. And then you get those 2 ball hawks in the slot, and 2 guys that, and remember we saw Caden Stearns get after Lamar Jackson and Dak Prescott, and Jaquan McMillan did the same thing to Josh Allen and a number of other good quarterbacks last year. So I would love to see that personnel grouping. I think when you're talking about guys who play in the slot, to me, here's what they have to have. These are the borderline, just the baseline requirements. You got to have quick feet. You got to have good ball skills, and you've got to be rugged physically. I mean, those are 3 things that I think Chris Harris Jr. really exemplified, having all of those different things at that position. And that's what made him so great. You react quickly. You know where the ball is going. You're able to be physical when you have to be, because you're kind of an extension of the defensive line. A lot of times you're playing right outside there, and the run game is going to come right at you a lot of times. So you got to be able to cut guys down in the running game. I just think those 2 players, Stearns and McMillan, if they can stay healthy, that would be the ideal in the Broncos dime alignment.
I like that. And I would even throw into, I'd be excited to see a little bit of Chris Abrams' drain. I think Denver can get creative. Look, you can, in dime situations, like you can have PS2 on the outside. You can even put him in the slot in certain situations, have another guy come in. Like it just really depends on down distance situation, personnel groupings. Are you going to go NASCAR package? Like there's so many things that you can do. And I think that the more capable bodies you have at that position, where I felt like last year, I was really concerned about Denver's depth at cornerback. Like if PS2 went down, remember the Houston game? He went down, we're like, oh my gosh, like season's over if he's out. This game is over if he's like can't come back into the game. Luckily he did. But overall, I remember being just absolutely concerned about Denver's depth and what they had behind PS2 in terms of coming in. You're not going to get the same level of play. I think Denver's in a position now where I do feel like you can mix and match different guys at different spots and still maintain a high level of play. The biggest wild card factor here, what is Jim Leonhard's philosophy going to be? How does it tie in with what Vance Joseph is going to do defensively after everything that we saw last year? This is going to factor into the Broncos cornerback competition, which is ongoing right now as the Broncos continue OTAs. But with that said, Broncos country, for all you everydayers out there, we appreciate you so much for tuning in, rocking with us. That'll wrap up today's episode of the show. For tomorrow's episode, Lockdown Broncos, we're going to continue giving you reports coming out of Dove Valley. We're going to be able to have access to one of the practices this week. We'll break down all the news, give you the recap, and much more, and continue to analyze some of the positions that the Broncos are focused on here as their offseason program. Phase 3 continues this week. We'll break it down and much more in tomorrow's brand new episode, Lockdown Broncos.